Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Comic Watchers. Comic Watchers is brought to you by Comic Watch. Comic Watch is your source for all your comics and media news and reviews written by fans for fans. Don't forget to follow us and subscribe to our channel and find us on Twitter and Facebook, blah, 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 blah. I'm your host, Cody, coming to you from Hawaii. And here's the rest of our shortened gang today.
Brian from Portlandia.
Hey, I'm Nick.
Portland.
I'm Nicholas, coming from Carthage, Texas, once again in the middle of nowhere.
So we should have a pretty good show lined up for you. We've changed the roster of books we're going to be looking at almost wholesale throughout the week after we read a bunch of stuff and we're like, nope, not doing that. So this week we're going to bring to you spotlights on Batman 75 from DC, Loki #1 from Marvel, and Vampirella #1 from Dynamite. But first, some news. Ryan?
Yeah, so I'm sorry to start off with bad news. However, DC Universe Titan shut down today. One of the crew members was killed during a stunt. I guess a piece of car that was supposed to come off hit the crew member. I guess he was a special effects coordinator. So they're going to shut down for a day or two and then continue filming. And then 33 people have died in the Kyoto animation. They do believe it was arson. We had two great writers, Nirma and Carlos, wrote a story on it. You can go to www.comic-watch.com to check it out. DC announces that the Flash Death of the Speed Force is coming this fall. And also iconic legendary writer-creator Alan Moore has retired. Sites are reporting. Maybe ours too. And we are getting a new Birds of Prey coming to us soon. It will feature Harley Quinn, Black Canary, and the Huntress. It will start this October, and I'm probably sure there's some other stuff probably going on. You can go to our website, comic-watch.com, to check it out. That's all. End of the road. End of the show. Good night. Cody, you're muted, I think. Maybe.
Hello?
Hello. Hey.
Hey, sorry. My mute button got stuck, and then it unstuck and went right back to mute. So,
Yeah.
I won't be muting anymore. That Birds of Prey series is being written by Brian Azzarello, right?
Uh-huh.
Yes, that should be really interesting. I'm not sure how I feel about Harley Quinn invading my Birds of Prey, but we'll see how that goes. So, are you guys ready for our first spotlight book?
Wasn't the Birds of Prey originally because they were all like birds of prey?
No, because wasn't
the Huntress,
Black Canary, but also Batgirl.
right? All having to do with.
She's not a bird. Bats aren't birds. B.
Well, I know that they're technically not, but they fly.
Huntresses also are not birds.
Yeah, I never thought of that for some reason. Well, because I don't think the Huntress was always. Never mind. Okay.
And then Oracle, who is for certain not a bird, can't walk, much less fly. Like,
She can walk.
Just chaos. Okay.
Yeah, no, I was thinking that. Anyways, my joke was going to be like, oh, Harley Quinn's not a bird. And then if I was right, then I was going to say, well, I guess she's cuckoo. Get it?
That is the most failed joke of all time. I mean, outside of Dane Cook. Okay,
Well,
so if you've made it to this point in the show, we apologize. Batman 75, the start of the City of Bane arc from Tom King and Tony S. Daniel. The basic setup here is the first 74 issues of Batman. If you haven't been reading those, then it's probably not going to make a whole lot of sense, but Thomas Wayne is back. He traveled to a Lazarus pit with Bruce in the last issue, and they had a falling out. And now Bruce is stranded in the fucking Himalayas or something, and Thomas is back in a Bane-run and controlled Gotham City. He's replaced Commissioner Gordon with Hugo Strange. Riddler is running around like a cop. It's total chaos, and Thomas Wayne Batman is running around with Gotham Girl as his sidekick. Now, we don't have a whole lot of information other than in Bane's conversation with Luthor, he's basically saying he wants to isolate Gotham City from the greater United States and fix Gotham City in a way that Bruce was never able to do. And that's kind of our general premise for this, what was reported, or at least said by Tom King, to be an arc that will define Batman for a generation, and things will never be the same, and all of the other hooey that he has been spouting for the last couple of months. So, why don't we start with Brian on your thoughts on City of Bane?
So, as you guys all have known, that I'm a pretty big Tom King Batman fan, kind of, to a certain extent. But I think there was a certain point that I dipped out. I think it was right after, in the middle of the nightmare stuff that he was having. So I haven't read since then to this one. So I felt like I didn't know what was going on. I was like, how did Thomas get back? How did Dad get back? Where the hell's Alfred? Why is the Joker and the Riddler being cops? Like, I had no idea what was going on. But now that Cody actually took away all my questions that I had in his recap, it was actually pretty good. I liked it. The art was good from what I remember of it, and then I like the coloring. Like, Joker was made horrifyingly scary. I like it. I'm on board. I'll read the rest. Nick, what do you have to say?
I don't know. I've maybe read a dozen of the 74 issues leading up to this, so I was definitely one that I was lost reading this. And separating those thoughts, the issue was still kind of a mess. It's a convoluted story that is weighed down by his attempts to bring everything together. And it's just exhausting. It's kind of a chore to get through. Some of the artwork's not bad. I don't particularly care for how they drew the Joker. He looked strange to me, like he was always warped or something. Outside of that, it was just a chore to get through. It felt like a lot of Tom King stuff where there's this 2-page introduction and then a narrator comes in and the narration leads you through the story to the somewhat cliffhanger ending that's supposed to define Batman. But ultimately, if you haven't followed these 74 issues before, you're probably going to be lost. And the problem with that is you can't point to an arc in this run and say this is what you need to jump into and this is what you can check it out to see what Tom King's about. Because you have to start from the beginning and just work your way through the whole run for most of the stuff to come together like he's intending. And maybe that'll work better in a Bat Cat mini or 12-issue series. But for this long, extended Batman run, it's just become exhausting to read, and I couldn't get that thought out of my head through this issue. Halfway through, I just kept checking to see how much was left, because I wanted it to be over. That's generally how I felt about Tom King on Batman. I'm pretty much ready for it to be over. We talked recently about Bendis on Batman, and that is what I want out of a Batman comic, so I'm hoping that there are plans for that. To see this come out right after is just a stark contrast in what DC's doing with the character. So I hope they nail down something specific that is a little bit more enjoyable going forward after Tom King's extended run. Cody, what do you think?
Yeah, so brace yourselves, everybody, because I'm going to say I didn't hate this book. Like, I have pretty much hated everything Tom King has done with Batman since, at the very least, I think the last issue that I enjoyed before this was The Double Date with Clark and Lois. And, that was, 30 issues ago? I didn't hate this issue, and I think part of my reasoning for not hating this issue is I liked Night Quest the last time Bruce got broken by Bane and had to fight his way back and reclaim his title. And I liked Dark Knight Rises, where Bane took over the city and Batman had to fight his way back and reclaim his city. So, I mean, really, like, this is not uncharted territory, even for Batman. So, I mean, as far as the groundbreaking claims that King has been throwing around, I think he needs to remember that not everybody reading comics is like 25 or younger. And some of us remember things that have already happened. But also, you know, sometimes revisiting those things is fun. Like we get off on nostalgia for sure. So I mean, it definitely reminded me of a bunch of stuff that I enjoyed. I don't mind the artwork. I don't mind Tony Daniel in general, but I also don't like seek him out. You know, to me, he is almost like Mustard Plug is the general ska band. Like, I don't know who sings this particular ska song. It's probably Mustard Plug. I feel like Tony Daniel is kind of the same with comic art. Like, who is that? It's probably Tony Daniel. It's totally serviceable and fine. I would expect like a Jim Lee on an arc like this, as highly as they touted it, but you know, whatever, DC, you do you. But yeah, I'm with Nick. I'm ready for a Bendis run, or you know, I'm super hyped on the Warren Ellis Brian Hitch piece that's coming out, the Batman's Grave. So yeah, I mean, I'm just ready for a different Batman. It's been so long, like just so long and convoluted, and like Nick said, a chore. But this is, you know, one of the better arcs so far. I mean, you know, it's one issue in, but we'll see where it goes. I'm on board. Whatever. I've read all 75 issues, even though it's been painful and hard to do.
I'm sorry.
Any final thoughts on Batman? Like, that's it. That's my one nice thing I have to say to you, Tom King. This entire year, I'm done.
I'm still upset with him. That's all.
All right.
Tom King.
Well,
Batman.
On that note, why don't we move on to Dynamite's Vampirella #1? Hang on, let me grab my notes because we've got some crazy artist names coming up. So Vampirella was written by Christopher Priest and drawn by Ergun Gundas. I looked all these up. I looked up these pronunciations. Took me like 20 minutes to find how to pronounce some of these names, but Ergun Gundas is the artist here. This series starts out a new chapter in the ongoing saga of Vampirella, a 50-year-old character picked up by Harris Comics in 1992. At some point along the way, I think about 6 years ago or so, Dynamite got the rights and started publishing Vampirella miniseries. But this is the 50th anniversary, and this is how we're kicking it off. It's with I guess it looks like it's trying to be a condensed origin story because she's had so many different origins along the way. This looks like a stab at creating a sort of definitive origin for, you know, 2019 and beyond's Vampirella. So she's sitting down with a therapist or a trauma counselor after an encounter with a villain on a plane, and the plane crashed and a bunch of people died and Vampirella didn't. And I mean, that's the issue in a nutshell. It really should have been a double issue because it just did a whole lot of setup and not a whole lot of progressing. But yeah, I mean, that's the synopsis. I thought I was going to have more to say on that, but I guess I don't. Nick, since you're the one that made us all read this book, why don't you kick off your thoughts on Vampirella #1?
Yeah, I probably did make everybody read this book. I started a discussion probably a few weeks back when I started doing research for Vampirella since the new release was coming out, and I just saw so much potential with this character and what she can offer to the world today, and especially in the comics medium, what she can bring. So I had high hopes, and then the interview with Priest happened, and He said some pretty sketchy things that made me wonder if he's the type of person to bring this feminist take on Vampirella. So I quelled my hopes for this one. I went into it just hoping for a good comic, and I think that was the best approach because he does approach this in saying there's a lot of different origins, there's a complicated history, and we're trying to get a new flagship with Dynamite. So this is a straightforward issue that is going to explain her origins, and it really acts as an introduction to this character. But unfortunately, it doesn't really commit to this new take on Vampirella that they want to bring that you can tell he's trying to inject in it. It kind of feels haphazard in the way it approaches that. And I can ultimately forgive that and give it more time, excuse me, because I know how Priest works. A lot of his stories, they're going to take time to evolve and come together, but it can't take too long. This is a character that is judged at face value all the time. So every time you get a story that's anywhere towards mediocrity, it sells into the idea that this book is only there to sell variant covers. And it's an easy argument to make when there's 84 different variant covers. Our News Corps Ross had such a hell of a time with that one because it is a chore to sort through all of these. And I understand that. This book sold 60,000 plus before it even released, so it's one of the most popular Vampirella comics of this modern era. It had a lot of hype to it, so Priest should have delivered something that had people talking. And ultimately, this is one that most people are going to say, hopefully issue 2 really starts to pick up. And that's kind of a shame because she had such potential to do something really great. But that's not to say the comic is bad. It's just maybe my hopes were a little higher for what Dynamite was trying to do for her, and maybe he played it a bit safer than I would have cared for. There are a couple of panels or pages in there that are really great of Vampirella talking to her psychiatrist, Dr. Shari. I believe, excuse me if the pronunciation is incorrect. But that was where the issue worked best because it allowed itself to dive into what she means to this world and what she is perceived as. And I thought that was great because that's ultimately where the discussion with Vampirella usually is how you see her when she's just on the shelf. So this is very much a take of her at face value and what people are going to look at her as. But it's also trying to introduce this villain. It's trying to bring back her mother. It's doing all of these things, and it can't really commit to one in particular. So it starts to feel a bit jumbled, and then it ends, and it feels like it's way too short for a first issue, and it's going to have hype. This is the book that you wanted to be a flagship. So I truly believe it should have been an oversized issue. And that maybe would have helped this problem of it not being fleshed out enough. So ultimately, I'm willing to give it some time, maybe a few more issues, but if it doesn't pull together, it's just going to be another book that kind of is forgotten in the 50 years of her publishing history. So hopefully things get better.
You said fleshed out about Vampirella.
I was so sad nobody was excited about my blurb that it would leave fans thirsty for more, but I thought it was great. B, what'd you think?
I think I liked it a little bit more because I had lower expectations than I think you did. Because I don't remember a lot from reading anything of her. I think I may have read one of maybe like 10 comics of hers altogether. So for me, it was nice to kind of catch up and have that therapist kind of explain to her, and then also I like the psychiatric part of it. Like, no, there's no such thing as vampires, et cetera, et cetera. So that was kind of cool. And I mean, for fans who don't know anything about her, her mother being there was like, okay, I mean, I don't know if she was dead or alive before. So it was pretty good. My only complaint was the art was really inconsistent. It would have, I didn't like how her face were changed from there to there. I don't know if they had different artists throughout the book. I'm not sure. I wasn't a fan of the art.
No,
Sorry.
just the one artist.
Oh, well.
Yeah, he illustrated and colored it, I believe.
Oh, I thought it was pretty colors, like good coloring choice.
I like how B is always like, I liked the colors. I didn't like the colors.
Colors are important. It changes
Colors
the world.
are colors are important. I agree. Uh, yeah, I mean, I went into this reading with the lowest of expectations. I was, 12 years old when Harris started shoving Vampirella down our throats. In the same era as like Lady Death and Evil Ernie and the Rapture, I think it was. She from Billy Tucci, like all of these uh, kind of weakly written but pretty art with big boobed women on the covers. And I mean, like I said, I was 12, so I mean, there was a certain appreciation there. I definitely read a fair amount of Vampirella, but I mean, even at 12, I was like, oh, this character is not working on any level. And here again, I'm, getting ready to turn 38, and I still feel like this character doesn't work on any level. And if anybody could have created a level where she does work, I feel like it could have been Priest. I'm a huge Christopher Priest fan and have been for a very long time. This is a guy that I feel like the industry has treated like garbage for almost his entire career, and now finally, like, people are kind of looking around saying, "Hey, this Priest guy's pretty good," and it's like, damn, I know, right? So, I wanted to read this book and be like, all right, here we go. I'm going to read a Vampirella book, but I'm not. I'm probably not going to read number two. I didn't hate the artwork. I didn't not like the artwork. Um, that was fine. The art was fine. The story was a mess, and there was nothing there to make me care. Like, Nick, when you were talking about the Priest interview, you had shared this blurb with us when we were talking, had our long discussion about how there was a plan to show women of all body types and kind of really push this opening of what sexuality is and how we perceive it and how we consume it. But there was fucking none of that in the first issue. None. There was Vampirella, and that's it. And
Yeah.
then a bunch of
He said that it was going to be a world populated by women, and that's what he wanted to explore. And it just wasn't there. That was my biggest complaint. Is he talked a lot about what he wanted to bring in this unorthodox, progressive approach to her, and explore what her sexuality is and how she appears. There just wasn't there. They talked about how she can be ostracized in this modern world and what that meant, but that was on such a general level, and it only got 2 pages.
Right. So, I mean, obviously there is some kind of demystifying sexuality agenda at Dynamite, and I don't know if that's because of the people that run Dynamite or if it's because of the properties that they have their hands on. Because, I mean, we're talking about a publisher that's publishing Elvira comics, Vampirella, Red Sonja, Xena. Like, these are the properties they have, and they got to work within the framework, and maybe they're just trying to spin it into something that it's not. But yeah, I thought this book failed on almost every level.
On that note, that's so many templates for great, strong women that have so much potential for relevance today. Red Sonja is one of them. I know they're developing a movie with her, and I know they're trying to take that angle, but you have to commit to it. You can't half-ass this. You have to do it.
Right. So yeah, I mean that's where I stand on Vampirella, exactly where I stood as a 12-year-old, and nothing has changed. It's a shame. Any final thoughts on Vampirella before we move into Loki?
Just one. The ending is titled Mommy Dearest and the Many Origins of Vampirella. So that's a tongue-in-cheek reference to what Cody mentioned, in that she has a super complicated past. So maybe it's going to start pulling all of these things together, and maybe that'll benefit the series in maybe a collected form.
Maybe. All right. So our final book is Loki #1. This is written by Daniel Kibblesmith and comes from the Turkish artist Özgür Yildirim. Yes. So here we are in the events post-War of the Realms, in which Thor is now the Allfather. I guess spoiler alert if you haven't kept up with War of the Realms, I don't care. Thor is the Allfather. Loki has been given Jotunheim to rule over the Frost Giants. Of course, Loki sacrificed himself to save Freya and was eaten by his father Lofri. And then at the end of War of the Realms, he burst forth from Lofri's belly, and I don't know. Now he's the king of the Frost Giants. Cool. Except it's Loki, and he didn't want to be the freaking king of the Frost Giants. So Loki is out getting into the usual Loki trouble, Loki nonsense, and Thor is kind of trying to rein him in. And you feel like, hey, dude, look, this Frost Giant stole this other Frost Giant's axe, and it's your job as king to sort that out, because apparently that's what kings do. Like, I don't know, get yourself a magistrate, man. But yeah, so Loki is off having fun battles and escapades across the 9 realms. Nick, thoughts on Loki #1?
Yeah, the book is fine. It's a fun book that is, enjoyable to read. The art's great. I was actually surprised at how well executed the book was. It hits a lot of fan service notes, and those who followed with War of the Realms will find plenty to like. But I can't talk about this book without also talking about the unending swarm of titles that Marvel releases every week. And this is one of those books that feels like it's destined to be lost in that mess of titles that we are handed every single week. There's 20, sometimes more, that are coming from Marvel, and this is one of the books that feels like one that you want to get to and you want to read, but it's just going to get lost. And hopefully it does enough to become relevant and to be important, but it's a fun read for those who are going to check it out. But this is one of the books that I felt while reading that I would not have read this book without us talking about it on the show. It would definitely be one of the books that I saw on the shelf from Marvel and thought, wow, that's another one they're doing. That's cool. But it's just too much to keep up with. My comic shop likes to complain that there's too many good stories, that they're not selling well because there's too much on the shelf to choose from, so you end up not buying as much. They're keeping up with the typical titles, and this is one of the books that you'll probably enjoy, you'll probably like to read, but there's so much out there from Marvel. Like, if you want this book to do well, you've got to trim the fat, and you've got to let these books stand out. You can't put it out in 20 plus titles a week. It's just too much for us to keep up with, I think, and it felt like it was just going to be lost in that mess from the start, which might be unfortunate, but it's also such a continuation of War of the Realms that was the epitome of Marvel releasing way too much. It's just another one of those ones where it's tons of tie-ins and just tons of stuff that you might enjoy for 5 minutes and then you'll quickly forget about it. So Loki, while it's a valiant effort and it's pretty well executed on the artistic side, Marvel just needs to tone it down. It's too much content, and Loki falls into that category where I'm not going to follow along with, because behind a dozen other titles that I should probably read too. B, what do you think?
It was fine. It was cool. Like I guess for me it was kind of a struggle because I didn't read War of the Realms. I didn't read usually Thor. I don't usually read anything in that like part of the Marvel universe. So for me, like reading Loki, I didn't really know what was going on or who was what. I mean, I knew who his brother was, Thor, obviously. I like the colors; they were pretty. The art was fine. The story was fine. Like I didn't see, and there was nothing wrong with it. I was like, oh, that's a cool book at the end of it. Also, at the same time, yeah, I'm probably not going to read this again unless I have to. I don't know. Is it a miniseries? Is it ongoing?
I believe it's ongoing.
Oh, yeah, I'm probably not going to read it anyway. Like, if it's a miniseries, sure, but it's ongoing. It didn't draw me in enough to be like, oh yeah, let's read the rest.
I actually probably will. It actually did draw me in. I typically am not a fan of Marvel's Thor character. I've gone on at length about this in other episodes, but something about this book grabbed me. Like something about the way that Kibble Smith writes Loki's voice, I thought was really unique. It's something that we really haven't seen much of in Marvel ever, really. Like Loki having his own distinct voice, his own distinct personality, fleshed out and feeling like a real character and not just a foil or, a product of some greater scheme. Like this feels good to me. I thought the art was fantastic. Like it fit the story really, really well. So I probably will continue to read this at least, through the first arc or so. And I'm not reading Thor, so I mean, for whatever that tells you. Yeah, I enjoyed this book like a hell of a lot more than I thought I would. I kind of put it down and walked away, and I was like, wait a minute, I liked that. So, to Nick's point though, when you were talking about the wide spectrum and sales and stuff, Comic-Con recently actually was talking about how yes, there is a glut of books on the market, and yes, top end sales aren't doing as well as they have in the past, but that the low end sales are stronger than they have ever been. When you get down into like the 250s, the 300s, 350s, they're stronger than they've ever been. And part of that is because of this kind of scattershot publishing style. What they end up doing is finding niche markets and fans that are into that particular niche market. So if you're a fan of like the Thor universe, this is perfect for you, and that's probably what you're buying. I don't think that the majority of fans pick up the number of books that we here at Comic Watch do. Yeah, like the number of titles that they're following, I think is not as great. But if you're, somebody that's maybe following, 5 or 6 titles and you see Loki on the stands, like that's marketed to people that are into Thor or people that are into, I don't know if comedy series is the right tag for this, but I mean it's a lighter hearted, in that Deadpool, Harley Quinn kind of vein. So I don't know. Like I think if this book sells 10,000 units a month, then it'll be right where it's supposed to be. Like no shop should be out there trying to order 20 copies of Loki. But order 3 or 4 because you're probably going to have 3 or 4 people that want it. So that's my 2 bits on the strength of the market right now, because I think the market is really strong right now and people want to dismiss it because I don't know, because they're Comic Watch or Comic Gate or whatever. But the market's strong. It's just strong in a way that we're not familiar with.
Yeah, I actually like that point that it is kind of this universe niche marketing that, the fans of X-Men are really hype right now because of what's happening. And then fans of Thor are just coming off of War of the Realms. So there's a lot of this. Fantastic Four is another one. They play to their fandoms a lot. And I think an aspect of that is this legacy character, the second tier character, in that I'm seeing a lot of better stories coming from Miss Marvel, Miles Morales, and Ironheart. And I think the flexibility that these characters, Loki might even be one that has such a distinct voice because there isn't so much that they have to bring to the table, and these creative teams can maybe have more fun or be more original. They have more leeway to tell stories that are interesting and they feel like they should be higher tier stories. And that's great for Marvel. There is so much. Like I'm following with all of these, and Loki feels like one of those ones I've got to let go because there's just too much from them.
Sure.
These lower tier characters, they're I feel like I'm more interested in theirs than, Avengers and Captain America and stuff like that. I'm following along with titles that are selling between 15 and 25,000 a month.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense to me. Any final thoughts on Loki? We did want to, little bonus content for you. We did want to at least address the fact that Age of X-Men Omega #1 comes out. That's the capstone for the Age of X-Men arc. Only Brian and I have been actually reading the Age of X-Men arc. And for the most part, I feel like it was a very successful event. Right up until maybe the tail end, where Omega just had some storytelling flaws. And I think that they're storytelling flaws as a result of trying to end this thing maybe prematurely. I don't know, like almost like they didn't really, they knew that they had a deadline, right? We know that Hickman is coming. So this story could only ever exist in a certain span of time. And in a lot of the miniseries as well, like it just felt like we get to the end and then we're rushing to resolve this thing so that Hickman can have all his toys. I don't know. Like, it was not a bad ending, and I thought it was a great experiment. Like looking at, these kind of high philosophical concepts and using mutants to kind of play out, the flaws in social structures and the flaws in social institutions. I thought was, a logical way to take the X-Men even, but Omega was hard to read. It just kind of was. You get to the end, it's like, well, shut up, cat. Magneto wants to go, but he wants to stay, and he can have his cake and eat it too, but nobody knows how. I think that wasn't very well explained. But yeah, so in the end, the Age of X-Men still exists as a alternate, but not really an alternate reality, like its own plane of existence. I don't know what that means, but cool. B, what'd you think of the event as a whole, and how it ended?
I got really into, well, actually, because I kind of felt like the Age of, one of my favorite arcs that I can always will go to whenever anybody asks me what's my favorite arc, it's always Age of Apocalypse from 95. Mm-hmm. So anytime you add Age of, my mind automatically goes back to Age of Apocalypse. So it builds up my, it kind of builds up my expectations higher than probably normal would, like if it was called something else. So I always go in with big expectations. It was good. I didn't read all of them. Like I didn't read Nightcrawler, which is really weird because he's one of my favorite characters. I just didn't like the role that he was playing at the time. It just, I don't know. I was left with more questions than I did have any answers. I didn't even know I had that many questions until I read Omega. I don't know. I felt like it was poorly done. I felt like it was just like, oh, let's hurry up and end it. It had so much more potential. I mean, it comes down to Nate being like, I'm really tired. You guys are right. I'm just done with this world. Like, go back. Like, there was no, like, power, like, for 10 issues of Uncanny when it first came back. It was all action-packed, getting ready for this big fight until Nate changes it. And then it ends with him being like, this just wasn't for me. What? No. Like, give me something. Like, build up something. Like, when we go back to Age of Apocalypse, Magneto, or I forgot who it was tearing Apocalypse literally apart. Like, there's this huge fight. Give me something other than, I'm tired. I need a nap. All right, go. Like, that's what it felt like to me. It was dumb. Not dumb. It just wasn't for me. I mean, for me, it was dumb. It was stupid. That's all.
Fair enough. Yeah, I thought it could have ended better. I thought that the Next Gen series by Brisson was out of this world great from start to finish. I really liked Tim Seeley's Apocalypse and the Extracts, although it kind of got a little bit wonky in the middle, but like the beginning and the end were really great. Extremists I really wanted to love and just couldn't make myself love it. It felt like it had no like narrative core. Like it was just a collection of vignettes. What other ones? I didn't love the Nightcrawler one. It was fine, but it went nowhere. What were the other books? Marvelous X-Men was a decent core book. And that's it, right? No, Prisoner X. I did like Prisoner X. Although I'm not super hot on the art. I can't put a finger on why, but yeah. So, I mean, that was it. Age of X-Man is over. It's now the Hickman era for the X books. And we'll see if that's any good or not.
I have really low expectations of it.
I also have very low expectations for it.
So maybe it'll be great for us and everybody else will hate it.
Yeah, God willing. That would be wonderful. Yeah, so I guess that is it. Why don't we move into what have you been reading and what are you looking forward to? Nick.
Okay, so yeah, this has been a busy week for me because I discovered Valiant Comics. So in about a week, it started with The Valiant that came out in 2014. And I hadn't really paid that much attention to the publisher up until this point, even though my local comic shop has just really been hammering on me to try it out they said I would just love it. So I read The Valiant and it was just such a deep rabbit hole. Ninjak was amazing, so I took off on Ninja K, then Ninjak versus the Valiant universe, and that kind of opened me up to the universe that they're creating, and it made me want to pretty much deep dive into everything they've done. So in 2012, they started with their reboot after being purchased and coming out again as Valiant Entertainment, and they launched as Exo Manowar. They did Harbinger, Bloodshot, and another title that started in 2012 and worked its way up to Harbinger Wars. So this past week, I went in with Exo Manowar Volume 1 and Volume 2. I did Harbinger Volume 1 and Bloodshot Volume 1 and 2, and I'm working my way up to the Harbinger Wars. And for those who have been following, Vin Diesel's doing the Bloodshot movie, and that's probably what they're going to be working their way to if the Valiant universe takes off cinematically. The Harbinger Wars were just amazing, and the way they build their continuity and the way it all works together is just brilliant. My shop described it as they're doing what Marvel was doing in the 60s and 70s with their titles and tying them in correctly and telling the story, and they're doing really good things. And I'm sad it's taken me this long. I haven't really deep dived into an entire publisher's content like this ever. It's usually just a few titles that attract me, and this is almost everything they're doing. Everything's so tightly wound and so perfectly scripted and outlined. You can tell they have this plan and they're putting quality over quantity. And I know we just talked about that with Marvel, and it might be something that's on my mind diving into Valiant, but they're doing what I want out of comics, and it's just really great. So while it may not be what's upcoming, what I'm looking forward to is the Harbinger Wars and finally diving into that event and why it has so many people talking and why it's inspired so much. And from there, it's on to stuff like Rapture and Book of Death and the more modern events that they've done. But if you haven't yet, check them out. Just pick up the title. The Valiant is a great introduction. It kind of introduces you to the world and all these different characters. And just take off from there. It's really, really amazing stuff.
I actually got to catch up on all of Age of X. I also caught up on all of Uncanny X-Men. They took out a lot of people. They were not worried about not killing people. What else? Oh, I actually read the new Xena one. Actually, I just read the first episode. It's actually pretty good. You have to, or not the first episode, the first issue. It's actually really good. But if you don't know that, you have to know the characters. Like there was no build up. There was no like, oh, this is who this one is. How did they get together? And I actually think that they're portraying Xena and Gabrielle as a lesbian couple. which I haven't actually seen them fully come out and do that before. Maybe they have. I don't know. I've only read like one other small arc of Xena. So I got to read a lot, which was really cool. It was my first week of being able to fully dive back in. Looking forward to, I don't know, because I go off of our catalog or our Comic Watches books, so I always get confused of what's out this week versus last week, and then we got a double advance, so I'm so confused on what's actually coming out, so I don't know.
That's fair. I actually just found myself looking at the list saying, wait a minute, that's not out yet? Oh, okay. Yeah. So this week, I spent a lot of the week catching up on things that I was supposed to review maybe a week or so ago. So I've done a lot of reading, but none of it's really relevant. I did read the first 2 issues of Humanoids Ignited series. It's the first Humanoids published superhero series. It's being written by Mark Waid. It's extremely politically charged. I mean, as you would expect something from Mark Waid to be, given his role in this current climate. And I enjoyed it probably more than it deserved. So I'd like to go back and reread them again and see, if that kind of sticks with me. But I mean, the basic premise of that series is that there was a school shooting, and in the process of this school shooting, a handful of the students saw a light and developed powers. Like, it's very new universe kind of, the old Marvel imprint, where there was a big flash in the sky and then people across the world gained powers. And I don't know where they're going with this. I don't know how the shooting is necessarily linked to these children gaining powers, but the powers are interesting. Typically things that we haven't really seen before. And yeah, I'm into it. Like, I really enjoyed it. So I'm glad I took a look at that. I'll probably write up a review of the first 2 issues, or maybe the first 3 issues when the third one comes out all together. Just to give people a kind of an introduction primer into the series. For what I'm looking forward to, though, the Marvel's epilogue from Alex Ross comes out this week, 24th, right? 24th is next week? Yes.
Yeah.
And that should be really great. Like, I mean, if you haven't read Marvel's, just shut up and go read it. It's one of the great masterworks of comics of all time. Yeah, this is one of those legendary books that if you haven't read it, you're doing yourself a disservice. And 25 years later now, is that right? That can't be right. God, that might be right. 25 years later now, they're going to release an epilogue, some new content to add to Marvel's. So I'm looking forward to checking that out. There's a handful of other things. Of course, Hawkspot, House of X, Powers of 10. It's not X, it's 10, according to Hickman. Those come out this week, and that'll be a big deal, or at least one of them. I don't know which one. House of X, I guess. And I'm looking forward to hearing what comes from San Diego Comic-Con, because that will be happening this weekend. So, we should be getting an influx of really big news, or, a whole lot of really small news. We'll see what happens. And I guess that is it for our show. What's wrong, V?
Oh, I got an email from work, and it was just really weird. And I was
Okay.
like, what the fuck? Like, I don't know. Just, it was a backhanded compliment.
Those are always fun.
Right, and I was like, bitch, I haven't even met you yet. Whatever. Fuck off. Anyways, check us out on www.comicwatch.com. Are we done?
Yeah.
Oh, my bad. I thought you were just
No. Do the thing. Do the thing.
We do stuff. Check us out on comic-watch.com. You can check us out on all social media, The Comic Watch. You can check us out on a plethora of iPod or whatever these things are, podcasts. Check us out on YouTube. Check us out on iTunes podcast. You can check us out on Spotify, SoundCloud,
Podbean.
which just makes me think of coffee. I think we're somewhere else now. There's all kinds of stuff going on. Chuck, just Google us.
And go read Valiant. Do yourself
Yes.
a favor.
All right.
All
Bye.
right, that's it. We're out.